It's time to sit upon the grass and talk of days of old. Well, as you can see, I'm not actually sitting on the grass, but I kind of am, because this specific paint colour is called Grasmere Green, and as you can see, it's covering this, the Land Rover Defender 75 Years Edition, because, and I'm going to hop down now, because it's not the most comfortable spot, it's been 75 years since the boss of the Rover car company, Maurice Wilks, decided that the Jeep, the wartime Willys Jeep he was using on his family farm, was just getting a bit too worn out and a bit too broken, and he needed something to replace it. But rather than doing the obvious thing and just going out and buying another cheap war surplus Jeep, and this was 1948, let's not forget, so there were plenty of them around, Wilks decided he could do a Jeep, but do it better. And so he concocted a simple, square, upright, four-wheel drive vehicle. Actually, it had a centre seat in the original prototype because Wilks thought, well, it might actually be a replacement not merely for the Jeep, but also for tractors in general and be a true multi-purpose vehicle. He had created the Land Rover, and it was 75 years ago that the first Land Rover, the famous registration number HUE 166, nicknamed Huey ever since, was built in a colour very, very like this one. I haven't driven Huey, but I have to admit that I have been lucky enough to drive a very, very early Land Rover, quite a famous one, 438DEL, one of the first built, one of the first handful of cars built. That one had a tiny 1.6 litre Rover car engine, and I drove it on a day quite like today, warm and sunny, windscreen down, roof off. That test drive was about 15 years ago, and honestly, it's still the most fun I've ever had with four wheels under me. It was just the most intoxicatingly wonderful thing to drive. So simple, so capable of everything it was doing. It was driving it on gravel tracks like this one, across fields like this one, and it was just, the car was so happy and I was so happy. Incidentally, it also proved that you don't need a massive 2-and-a-bit ton SUV if you want to go off-roading. Those old Series 1 Land Rovers are both compact, 80-inch wheelbase, don't forget, and light. This new 75th anniversary Defender is a 2-and-a-bit ton hulking great SUV, but it's not quite the climate criminal you might instantly accuse it of being, because this one is a plug-in hybrid, and it's a surprisingly efficient one. And we have this playground of gravel tracks, mud, deep pools of water, grass and everything else to go and play with it. And the battery's pretty well charged up, not quite fully charged, but there's enough charge in it, and we can go and do some off-roading on pure electric power. Before we do that, let's take a quick look at the interior. There's a lot of very clever stuff, particularly design-wise, going on here on the Defender's interior, because Land Rover has managed to carry over the rugged look and feel of its eminent predecessor, the original Defender that went out of production in 2016. This new version was introduced in 2020, but it's also managed to make it luxurious and comfortable, which is, even at the best, was something you could never say about the old Defender. In fact, in the old Defender, you nearly had to wind down the window to get your right elbow out to make turns into square right-hand junctions. It was not a comfortable car. This is wonderfully comfortable. It's got excellent front seats, nice big steering wheel. No point in making it small. Why would you have a small sporty steering wheel in a Land Rover Defender? Gear shift up here on the dashboard means that there's tons and tons of storage space. There's loads here, there's big cup holders here, there's a phone charging pad, massive door bins. This box under here is actually refrigerated, that's an option. There's more stowage here with rubber mats to stop stuff sliding around, USB slots there, more here, and a 12-volt socket. Grab handle for the passenger. It is really, really practical. It's exactly as practical as you would want a car like this to be. Now, this isn't the biggest screen that Land Rover makes, and it is a bit galling that this 123,000 75th anniversary edition does not have the biggest screen. Nonetheless, Land Rover's Pivi Pro system, weird name, good system, is, I think, arguably now the best. Maybe Mercedes is slightly ahead of it with the MBUX system, but I really like this. I like the way it works. I like the way it looks. It's very, very good. Nice digital instruments too. Nice bit of body color coming through in the cabin, and these exposed Allen key heads, or Allen bolt heads, I should say. Big, chunky, square door mirrors. Actually, even though these roof pillars are quite chunky, the way they've been angled, the fact that it's so upright and relatively close to you, means the visibility out is fantastic. I can see more of the road and the world around me from this seat than I could from the driver's seat of the Mercedes EQE SUV I was driving last week, a car that weighs about the same, incidentally, if you're complaining about weight. Overall quality is very, very good. I know build quality and reliability has not been a Land Rover strong point over the years, but this does feel very well put together. And there are lovely touches, like instead of chrome or piano black, there's a black crackle finish to some of the materials, and to this lovely kind of slightly rough and tactile panel here with the word Defender stamped into it. It's a really, really fabulous cabin. It's one in which you can knock off a long journey very, very comfortably and very, very happily. But let's check out the back. In the back, the Defender is as roomy and as capacious as you would expect and as you would want. There's tons and tons of legroom, plenty of headroom, even though there is an optional glass roof under that blind. There's useful touches like big grab handles that double up as coat hooks. There are USB slots down here. The heating, ventilation, air conditioning controls, nice handy seat back net. The front seats are a bit chunky, so your view forward isn't brilliant, but you've got nice big side windows here. And just over your shoulder and over your head, there are these nice alpine lights in the roof that do let a bit of extra light in. That's nice. The floor is almost completely flat. And this is one of the widest central seats you'll ever come across. Yes, it's a bit harder and a bit firmer in your back than the seats to either side, but actually you could potentially sit here quite comfortably for quite a long journey, and you're not going to be fighting for foot space with your passengers. Again, quality is generally speaking quite good. Some of the plastics look and feel a bit cheap for a car costing as much as the Defender does, but again, nice touches like the color, body color paint coming through, and it all feels well put together. The boot is excellent. It's absolutely enormous behind that big swinging door. Obviously, that door is not entirely practical for use in all situations, because if you're parked, say, on the right-hand side of the road at the pavement, you have to go out into the road to open the boot. That's not brilliant, but nonetheless, it's huge. The only problem is, of course, this being the plug-in hybrid model, the boot is slightly smaller than on the diesel versions. And also you can't have it as a 7-seater because the battery eats up the space where the folded seats would normally be. But if you're only carrying 5 people, this is absolutely fine. Tons and tons of space, really, really well set up. Often in car reviews, we'll talk about fitness for purpose, and it's that whole idea that a car does the job it's designed to do. Now, for most cars, that purpose has to be multifaceted. It has to be, a family car. It has to be an executive express. It has to be for short commutes and long journeys and everything in between. It has to be able to carry big things, but it can't be too big and impossible to park, and so on and so on and so forth. This Defender is one of those cars that does the whole fitness for purpose thing so well. Now, my hatred of SUVs is well known, almost legendary in the car trade, but I contend, and you can disagree with me if you like, that's fine, that this is not an SUV. It has some SUV-like qualities these days because it is comfortable, it is usable as a road car. In fact, more than usable, it's exceptionally comfortable to the point where, on a long journey, you would actually question the wisdom of spending more money on a Range Rover. It is that comfortable and almost that refined, but that's maybe another day's argument. But what this car does is what it was designed to do so well. It will traverse the worst terrain you can imagine. What we've done here today is a bit of mud, a bit of water, a bit of grass and a bit of gravel. And to be honest with you, tough terrain though this is by the standards of an ordinary car, the Defender hasn't even broken a sweat. At one point I realized I hadn't even bothered to switch the terrain control system into mud and ruts or grass, gravel and snow. It was just doing it in comfort mode. So, it's ludicrously over-engineered in that respect, as Defenders always have been. And that brings me to a salient point, which is you shouldn't buy one of these unless you need it, unless you actually need to make use of the capabilities. This is not a car to buy on a whim. This is not a car to buy because it's a fashion trinket, fashionable though it currently is. This is a car to be bought if you seriously need to use what it can do, which is to be able to bring you and anyone you're carrying and anything you're carrying across appalling terrain in appalling conditions and do it with aplomb. That's what this Defender does, and it is so brilliant at doing it, and that is why I love it. And unlike its predecessor, unlike that classic upright square garden shed of a thing, which I loved and I adored with all my heart for all of its shortcomings and faults, this is much more multi-purpose because you can do a long journey in it. I mean, I've driven these from Belfast to West Cork and back, and they're so comfortable, and that journey becomes such a pleasure when you do it in one of these. And you can drive it around town because, as I say, the visibility is fantastic all round. There are lots and lots of cameras. And actually, this car has a better pedestrian and cyclist safety rating than many other smaller, lighter cars, which is an interesting point that a lot of people who barrack on about heavy, bulky SUVs being used in town tend to ignore. And I do think that should be part of the equation and part of the debate. This is not the kind of big hefty killer that you might assume it to be. Obviously any car can kill in the wrong hands or in an unfortunate set of circumstances, but that's kind of beside the point. Anyway, as I say, don't buy it unless you actually plan to make use of it, unless you do live up a rutted goat track that freezes over in winter and turns to mud and slush in the summer. That's what this car is for. If you don't need all that capability, don't buy an SUV, go and buy an estate. Go and grab one of the last Volvo estates while you still can. Go and get a BMW 5 Series Touring or the new i5 Touring. Go and buy a Skoda Superb. There's a new one coming that's a plug-in hybrid as well, and will do 100 kilometers on a charge of its battery. Those are the cars you need if you want something big and practical, but you don't need to go off-road. If you do need to go off-road, if you need to haul heavy things, if you really need that four-wheel drive capability, get this, because it's glorious. It's wonderful. It's one of my favorite things, never mind cars, one of my favorite things in the world. And Land Rover has been doing that for 75 years. And I think it's an important anniversary to mark. It's the same anniversary as Porsche, incidentally, which we've been, people have been marking all this year. And there hasn't been an awful lot said about Land Rover this year, which I think is a bit of a shame because, it's an important anniversary. This car, this brand, what started with Maurice Wilks in 1948 changed the world in some ways for the worse, because without Land Rover and without what Jeep did in the 1950s and 1960s as well, you wouldn't have the SUV boom today. And so clearly, there are downsides to all this, but there are also many upsides. There is a point made that we would understand and know an awful lot less about our planet were it not for vehicles like this that could take people, the right people, into the places that they needed to go and explore. And that is actually true. There was a time when, for a significant portion of the Earth's population, the first motorized vehicle they ever saw was a Land Rover. So there is a contribution, as well as an awful lot of stuff in the credit column. It is a car of, I suppose, mixed heritage in that respect. It's done an awful lot of bad in some ways, but an awful lot of good in others. And I do love it. And I know I probably shouldn't. I probably shouldn't be saying that I love a big 2.5 ton SUV, but it does perform well as a hybrid. Actually, its long range fuel economy is better than some smaller, lighter hybrid plug-in hybrids, as it happens. And it does get decent electric-only mileage when you do fully charge that battery. And all the off-roading we've done today, all the fun and enjoyment I've had of getting out in the sun and the air and exploring the countryside has been on silent, zero emissions electric power, zero local emissions electric power. I didn't even scare the rabbits as I went round. So there's something to be said for that too. Not a car for everybody, and nor should it be. I love it. I wish I could justify and afford one. I can't in either sense, but I do still love it.